7 o'clock, so I'd like to...
Second, they're not on the air here. Let's wait for the, there we go.
Thank you.
Now we're on the air.
It's now 7 o'clock, and I'd like to, thank you. I'd like to call the commission meeting to order. The first thing I'd like to do is ask for a roll call.
Commissioner Cribbs?
Here.
Commissioner Greenfield?
Here.
Commissioner Lemire?
Here.
Commissioner McCauley?
Present.
Commissioner McDougall?
Here.
Commissioner Moss?
Here.
Commissioner Rechtel?
Here.
And Councilman Scharf.
Are there any changes, additions, requests relative to the agenda? The agenda includes Baylands comprehensive plan discussion, a review of the retreat experience we just had, and other announcements, other updates. If not, we'll begin with oral communications from the public. I have two cards, so we'll go with, do I have more cards? If there are speaker cards, could you please? Thank you. So I have 3 cards, and so we'll allot 3 minutes apiece for discussion, up to 3 minutes. So the first speaker is Admin Boozy.
Yes, sir. Okay, my name is Adman Boozy.
Is there a way to turn the mic on? Yeah,
I can speak louder.
I think the mic's working.
Excuse me?
Yeah, the mic's working.
Is it working?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Adman. My 3 minutes starts now. My name is Adman Boozy. I'm a resident of Palo Alto. I've been playing tennis. First generation, my son plays tennis, my grandson playing tennis. The rumors are that they're going to convert 3 courts that have been playing for over 20 years to pickleball. And this is not acceptable by me or by most people that play tennis there. And the reason is there are other courts that cross the way that are occupied by Saturday, Sunday by coaches that are appointed by the city or permitted by the city. And if they convert these other 3 courts to pickleball, there will be no tennis courts left to play. And the people that play these pickleball come from all over the area, Milpitas, Fremont, Santa Cruz. 90% of them, in my opinion, are not residents of Palo Alto. And there are more courts, like Rinconada, there are more than 10 courts. Here we have limited courts, and they're limited because there are coaches that coach most of the day there. And the parking is just impossible. So I'm definitely opposed this idea of converting, and people don't have to come in groves and bring their dogs and food and all that to the courts. And also the lack of parking for all these people. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
We went through this the last time with the tennis people. If you insist on clapping, which is inappropriate in this chamber, then we won't continue with the presentations. The next is John Park.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am a tennis player. So I want to thank you for letting us play tennis at Metro Park. We really appreciate that. My group consists of working professionals, university students, and longtime friends. And they would love to be here tonight at this meeting, but many work late hours, so they can't be here, and I'm representing them. In fact, so today is our tennis night, and we are at work or school during the daytime, so evening is the best time for us to play. And it's a time for us to play and get together, compete, and spend time together. I would say it would be a sad day when nearly half the existing courts at Metro Park would be permanently converted to another sport. In that during warmer days, sometimes we would wait like up to an hour, even with the 7 courts. And so I can't imagine what it would be like with only 4 courts. And on Tuesday evenings, 2 of the courts are allocated to lessons. So then with only 4 courts, then only 2 would be available for tennis. So during the times when I do wait for a court, I see other players play. So sometimes you see young kids playing first time with their parents or friends. And other times I've seen some college level players that are nearly professional. It's incredible. Or sometimes I see, elder ladies and gentlemen playing, and sometimes their serve is so much better than mine. So tennis remains a very popular sport. Sports fans see international competitions such as Wimbledon, US Open, and many others. So kids watch that on television. So those are kind of promoting tennis. So there will be a constant influx of new tennis players at these tournaments play out, thrilling points. So Federer, with his athleticism and smart playing, is not just a top tennis pro, but he is an incredible athlete. Venus Williams, come back from autoimmune disease to become once again one of the top tennis players in the world is incredible. And Bryan Brothers' abilities are they're just incredible out of this world. So just imagine when a young child sees these players play and they want to go out on the courts. So they go out to Mitchell Park and they see that half the courts are converted to another sport. I think it will be really disappointing to young kids. So I, along with hundreds of other tennis players that are not able to make this meeting today, urge you to keep the courts open for tennis. So if we do that, we can actually share between the pickleball and tennis, whereas if you convert completely to pickleball, you can't go to tennis.
Thank you, Mr. Park.
So
thank you,
we
Mr.
really
Park.
appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is Jenny Chen.
Yes, hi. I'm also a tennis player, and I'm a Palo Alto resident. I think when this whole thing started, we learned that the city of Palo Alto is making this consideration because they feel that those 3 courts over the bridge are not heavily used by the tennis players, and that's totally untrue. So I really challenge the Park and Rec to come by and see these courts, especially on the summer nights, because I myself sometimes have to wait for half an hour to an hour for a court. So those 3 courts are definitely used by the tennis player. The assumption that they're not used is false. And also, I believe reading a mission statement somewhere in the city of Palo Alto is that we want to have multi-use of our resources. So if these were converted to pickleball court, that becomes single use. And I think that defeats the whole purpose of the city's mission, since our resources are scarce. And when this whole, when the tennis community learned about this potential change, we started a petition. So far we have collected about 130 signatures against this conversion. And we have, I think, 2 petitions going out. One's by the tennis community, Palo Alto Tennis Club, and one is by a small group of us that we're just collecting signatures. And so we have 2 sets petition going, and my petition now has over 130 something signatures against this conversion. So I really challenge the city to come by to see the courts, and they are heavily used by the tennis players, especially on summer nights. And I do want to also point out that in the South Palo Alto, only Mitchell Park has lighted tennis courts, and that's 7 of them. So if you take away 3, there's only 4 lit courts left. That is totally insufficient to basically provide for the South Palo Alto tennis community. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last speaker will be Monica Williams.
Good evening, I'm Monica Engel-Williams. I'm a big tennis fan, having played for over 60 years, and was a member for over 25 years of the Palo Alto Tennis Club, and also served on its board. I'm now a new fan of a sport that has been around for over 50 years, but has only recently been discovered by Californians, and is pickleball. I started playing 4 years ago with 10 guys I met at the paddle tennis courts. They found it hard to find paddle tennis partners, so took up pickleball after paddle tennis champion Tom Follidaire discovered the sport when visiting LA. This group of 10 has now grown to over 400 players. Every weekday we average 40 players, except on Wednesdays there are over 50. Saturdays there are over 70 players, and Sundays there are over 80 players. 360 players each week playing on only 3 tennis courts. We put up 11 pickleball nets and are hoping the city will find a way to provide multiple dedicated courts, as many cities have done all over the nation. I want to thank all of you and the Community Services Department for listening to both tennis players and pickleball players alike, and know that you will take into consideration all of the facts and figures that you have gathered, and hope that you can soon make a final decision regarding tennis and pickleball courts access that will benefit the majority of the whole community. If there's any way we can help contribute to the cost, we're willing to start a pickleball raising campaign. Our group has over 100 Palo Alto residents who play regularly at Mitchell Park. If any of you are in any doubt and think pickleball may be a fad, please listen to this very carefully. The Indian Wells Tennis Garden near Palm Springs is the second largest tennis stadium in the world. This is where, almost 20 years ago, 17-year-old Serena Williams beat then 21-time tennis champion Steffi Graf. 9 years ago, Mr. Larry Ellison purchased this $77 million sports complex in Indian Wells. An agreement has recently been signed for the Indian Wells Tennis Garden to host the National Pickleball Champions for the next 5 years. You've guessed it, Larry Ellison now plays pickleball. The 2018 USAPA Pickleball Nationals will be there on November 22nd. And for the past 2 years, CBS Sports
Also, sir, can I get a couple more minutes?
has covered the National Pickleball Championships.
Sir, can I get
There's no doubt that pickleball is here to stay. Please come on over. It's a sport for generations. We had a 60-year-old playing on Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you
Ms.
for your
Williams.
time.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments and observations. Now we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is department report.
Good evening, Darren Anderson, Open Space Parks and Golf. Right. I want to give you a couple updates on various things within Open Space Parks and Golf. First, on the golf course, we're in the negotiations with a new company to manage the golf course. That's moving along well. We're close to an agreement, and we're targeting a grand opening for the weekend of April 28th. On the parks front, our next park renovation is scheduled for Bulware Park. We're going to do a community meeting on March 6th. Also under park section, we've got our bids for building the Pierce Park Dog Park due on March 6th, same date, and by late April, we should be starting construction. Construction should be about a month or so, and the hope is by late May, early June, we'll be opening that dog park. On open space, for a long time now, we've discussed the closed trails at Foothills Park. And last update, I gave you that there was still one survey. Unfortunately, there was one plant that wasn't in bloom during our previous surveys. Had to do another survey for this particular plant. That's happening this week. Once that's complete, we'll work with planning to move on to next steps. The one challenge I think I foresee is there are wood rat nests adjacent to some of the trails on Costa Noan. On Los Trancos Trail, the other trail that's got these issues, there are no nest obstacles. And so we might split them depending on what I hear back from planning in terms of delays for additional environmental review due to those nests. So I just want to keep you in the loop on that one. Every time I come to the commission, I'll give you a little update, but we're working on it actively.
Darren?
Yes.
Would the City of Palo Alto workers be doing this, or we have to put this out for bid?
This would be via a contract.
Okay, thank you.
The ad hoc committee working on Buckeye Creek and the 7.7 acres met with staff on February 22nd to discuss a game plan for when we come to open that property. Again, that topic will go to council on April 16th. That's the Buckeye Creek and the 7.7 acres recommendation that came from the commission. And the ad hoc had some good creative thinking on next steps and planning. Some of the ideas range from making sure we engage with the Friends of Foothills Park, to contacting our landscape architect, which I have done, about putting together a drawing that could show some possible uses of the 7.7 acres when it's in time to engage the public again for how we might use that. So Peter Jensen will help put together that conceptual drawing that shows some possible uses for the site, including restoration over time. The other idea was to see if we could invite some council members up to see that property in advance of the April 16th meeting. So we're investigating both those options. At our last, and I'll get into this more obviously in the next topic, but our last public meeting on the Baylands Conservation Plan, a member from the Public Works team came and spoke and gave a couple updates that I wanted to pass on to you. One had to do with Bixby Park, which is why I've got this opened. This aerial view shows Bixby Park highlighted here. You see it in the kind of the light brown color. It's a former landfill, and what happens with former landfills is they settle periodically and they have to be brought back to grade. So right now we've got some settlement happening in several areas. Public Works is going to come in and do about 10 acres of settlement, meaning they're going to bring in soil and raise that back up to the necessary grades. It's going to be happening in the next couple weeks from now, and they figure every year they'll have to do little segments like that for quite some time to bring it back to compliance.
Darren, where does the soil come from that you're getting?
I don't know. They import it, but they do have a screening process. Of course, when they originally capped this and capped several different portions over time, they have a rigorous screening process for what's acceptable and what's not in terms of capping material. So they'll apply that to whatever import they bring on this one too.
Is it an opportunity for any revenue at all?
Typically not. I don't see this being a revenue one. I think there might be some exchange for free grading. That often happens.
Okay.
So they come in and our staff doesn't have to pay for outside contractors to do that. The one thing we're kind of looking at is it an opportunity as we're bringing these low areas back up to fill? Is there an opportunity for burrowing owls? Because part of the conflict with owls being up there is really the burrowing rodents, which aren't allowed. But if we're adding additional fill, maybe there's some ways around that. That's one element we're looking at. The other one is a real challenge with invasive weeds on that site. And with bringing in all this new fill, what happens most often in my experience is an invasion of different invasive weeds. And can we find a creative way to stem that invasion and hopefully encourage some natives? So we've got a couple ideas that we're willing to look at for that one too.
Darren, I think we have some questions.
Sure.
Excuse me, Darren. Any chance the overburden at the 7.7 acres could be used for fill?
I don't think so. We looked at that overburden, and it's very difficult to move, very expensive, just to truck it out there.
Just thought I'd ask.
Good question. Was there any other questions on Bixby?
Yes, Darren?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
The meeting on Bulwer Park is on the 6th
Yes.
of March.
Yeah.
At what time is it?
I'll send an email out at the end of tonight and advise all the commission on that.
Okay,
I want
because
to say 6:30.
there is that aquatics meeting at almost the same time.
Peter's advising me 6:30 at Ventura Community Center? Yeah, 6:30 Ventura Community Center.
And where is it again?
Ventura Community Center is in the Ventura Community neighborhood. It's the old school that's there.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
send you it has the address on there. You have to get that facility. It's a
Thank you.
city residence.
Thanks for sending that out, Peter.
And Darren, you have another question over here, I believe? Jeff, did you have a question? Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Another public works activity, so we just looked at Bixby, and down here to the lower left is the Renzel wetlands, and there's a freshwater pond in the lower left. Public Works has been trying to deal with the berm on that pond and the faults in it. So it's leaking, it's breaking apart, and for a long time they've tried to fix it. Most recently, they engaged with our Baylands Comprehensive Conservation Plan stakeholders to say, hey, maybe there's opportunities to expand this freshwater wetlands into an upland invasive weed area and have more freshwater wetlands, which would also benefit the treatment plant too, to discharge more water there. But in working with the regulatory agencies, Public Works has learned that's not feasible in the near term. They've got to address these repairs and more immediately than that. And they are given clearance to go ahead and repair from the inside. So sometime soon, within the next probably 6 months, they'll be making those repairs to the berm along there, which means draining it and getting rid of the cattails that have choked off capacity throughout that area. That area, I should mention, gets 1 million gallons of treated water a day from the treatment plant. It flows through there, out into Matadero Creek, and into the flood basin. The last update that Public Works shared with us at that meeting.
Darren, just quickly, in the CIP that I just saw recently, the money for that was 1 or 2 years out. Does that influence anything?
For their repairs on
Yeah.
this, it wouldn't be. Their money for the emergency repairs will be covered through small capital funds in the water treatment plant facility.
Great. So we can use the money for something else?
Yes, they won't be touching Parks money for that one. Sorry, 2 more. The LATP site, let me show you that. This one's hard to see. I left it high visual because I wanted to give you context. So here's Shoreline Lake. Here's the rest of the Baylands. And there's this little property right here called the LATP site, the former Los Altos treatment plant. And the city owns this property, bought it in, I believe, '74. And there's a building on there. We're having some conversations about the LATP site for our Baylands plan, what to do with it, what's going to become of it, can parts be incorporated to the Baylands, that kind of thing. And Public Works showed that there's a building on there, and I've got a photo of this, that they're going to have to take down. And someone had suggested, well, maybe it's salvageable. Unfortunately, it's really not. They looked at it. The photos of the inside are worse than this, where it's collapsing, the wood's rotting. So they just wanted to give a heads up to those that are familiar with that site, that building will be taken down relatively soon. And that concludes my part of the department report.
Can I ask one more quick question? Back to the Bixby Park and the land sinking. Is that expected to happen in 6 or 7 more places, or just in that one place, and how long does it take? And shouldn't we think of creating some signage and whatnot so we don't have the what the hell's going on problem?
I think it's yes to the latter, that we need some signage explaining. The rangers will also be floating around the park, but we have a kiosk at the Baylands or the Bixby Hills restroom, so there'll be one there where we post this information. Why is this happening? What are we doing about it? What are the long-term plans? Unfortunately, it's not just isolated to one spot. It will continue in several areas. I think it's just endemic to landfills, although there's areas of Bixby, let me toggle back, that were capped more recently. It was broken into A, B, and C areas, and this whole backside was capped fairly recently relative to some of the other parts that were capped back in the late 80s, early 90s. So I expect this area to settle probably more frequently, and sooner rather. But right now they're starting in this area. I saw areas when I was actively working at the Baylands as a ranger where the trail dropped 6 to 8 feet, and I wondered why that elevation was there. I thought maybe it was a design element. No, it had just settled, so the entire trail had kind of collapsed in significantly. So I expect the same. I think they're going to correct it more frequently, however.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Kristen O'Kane, Community Services. I have a few announcements as well. 2 community events. The first is our summer camp fair, which is this Saturday, March 3rd from 11 to 1:30 at Mitchell Park Community Center. And this is a free event that highlights the different summer camps and programs that the Community Service Department offers. And we will have staff there who can assist people in planning their children's summer camps and helping to sort of arrange different schedules for the summer. So That is a part of our summer camp draw series where we can't register individuals that day, but we can help you fill out your form, and then the actual forms for registration are due by March 16th for the draw. The second event that Commissioner Cribbs mentioned is we're having a community meeting the same day, unfortunately, as the Bulware Park community meeting. This is on March 6th, and it's scheduled for 6 o'clock, but Commissioner Cribbs made a good point to me earlier today that that's a bit early for some people, so we might see about moving it out a little bit later. But the meeting is to discuss the next step in our aquatics program. So as you know, we currently have a third-party provider that is providing aquatics programming to the community. And their contract expires December 31st, 2018. And we're in the process of going out for bid again, or we will be going out for bid shortly, so we want to hear from the community now on what sorts of things we can improve on, or what may not be working well, what other types of aquatics programming the community would like to see at the pool. So this is the first step in a process of getting community input as well as specific pool users' input prior to us finalizing any future contract for the pool.
Kristen, how are people knowing about that meeting?
So the meeting has been posted at the pool, and it has also been sent out to our email list of pool users. We've also sent it to the specific lap swimmers who have sort of designated themselves as sort of a steering committee. We've reached out to the masters as well as PASA, who unfortunately won't be able to attend because they're going to be at an event somewhere, but that we've encouraged them to supply their comments to us through email in advance. There'll be additional meetings and community meetings and opportunities for input and engagement as we continue the process. So there'll be more chances.
This is not talking about stopping working with Team Sheeper, but sort of tweaking it, right?
Well, it'll be a new RFP process. So their contract is done December 2018, and we are going to start a new process where we could potentially have other bidders that could bid on supplying aquatics programming and management to the city.
Will this contract be longer? This new contract be longer?
The length of time?
Yeah, because it seems like a colossal, a lot of work. And I would hope that these contracts would be more like 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
It's likely that it would be longer, but we would have to negotiate that in the contract RFP process.
My understanding is we went with the timing we did on the last contract since we were doing something new and we didn't really, we wanted to build in and out if we needed it, I think if that's a fair way of characterizing this.
Exactly. I mean, we've sort of done this in phases where initially it was sort of on an emergency basis where we didn't have, this was a few years ago, we didn't have enough staff to continue lessons and provide lifeguards. So we contracted with Palo Alto Swim and Sport on an emergency basis, and then we did the contract with them to sort of carry us over through this interim, and now we're going to do another RFP, hopefully learning from this past process on what works and what doesn't work in this kind of contract. So.
I had a question about the summer fair for the camps. Are you going to have information there about the opportunity for kids who want to be the junior counselors?
Yes, so there's...
And staff opportunities as well?
Yes, we have that there as well. And we'll also have Palo Alto Swim and Sport will be there as well to talk about their different swim lessons programs. And also we have our aquatics camps. now that combine water time as well as land time games, but it provides a swim lesson in the day for a multiple hour camp. So they'll be providing all their information as well.
And so how are we publicizing that event?
This is, Natalie, could you help out on that one? Thanks.
Yes, so we have flyers that we've put up. I've posted the event on Nextdoor. It's on our social media. This is an event that we do every year, so a lot of people are familiar with coming and knowing that this is coming up. But all the community centers have it posted.
How do we decide what goes on the general email list and what doesn't? I would think that a lot of these things should just be broadcast to everyone who has the email list.
Well, we have an email list through ActiveNet, which is the system that we use to manage our classes and our rentals. So sometimes we use that, but it could include anyone who's ever registered for anything, and their children and their families. So it's quite a large list, but we can try to narrow it down so we can filter it maybe by people who've only registered for aquatics programs. So we try not to just blast out emails to people frequently because we want people to actually open them and look at them.
The trade-off is that if they get swamped, they ignore them, but also that some people aren't getting notified by meetings they might be interested in. And I would think once a month summary of these are the meetings that are going to be held in this next month would be useful. And one email a month is not going to be objectionable.
Okay.
So I would think that there'd be much more upside to that than downside.
Okay, we can look at something,
So what
maybe a
you're suggesting is
department
kind of like news from community services that people would come to see every month, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Do we ever buy ads anymore in the Palo Alto Weekly?
I'm sorry.
Do we purchase ads in the Palo Alto Weekly or put any calendar listings in the Palo Alto Weekly?
We do. We post our community events in the Palo Alto Weekly, but we also have a lot of social media sites. So Mitchell Park has we have Facebook pages. We are out on Twitter. We send out newsletters, e-newsletters frequently. So I do think the word is getting out there.
I mean, I haven't heard anything, and I'm a commissioner. Who gets the
We're worried about that, too.
Yes. Who gets the e-newsletters? How's that distributed?
You have to sign up for a newsletter.
It's an opt-in.
It's an opt-in.
Right.
I get all the emails whenever there's a park, whenever something goes to council. I get an email notification. What email list is that?
That's from the city clerk's office.
And that's a different email list. And so how do people opt in to get emails from the Parks and Rec?
I can share just a little bit about the stakeholder group I manage. So I've got friends groups specific to the Baylands, and they've signed up for that and said, yes, I want to hear from them. So when I've got Baylands-oriented stuff, I send them. I've got another group about dog parks, and I send them FYIs. And I've got one for open space and parks wide. But I'm a little more judicious about sending them out monthly, and I've heard from my stakeholder groups, take me off, I don't want to hear from you anymore. It's too much. And so I've whittled it down to just before public meetings usually, that kind of thing, or some big movement on a project, but not the frequent, reminders or updates. I usually save that for website or public meetings or notices in the park.
I would suggest that maybe we consider tabling this for now and pursue what kind of lists are available and how they're managed at some other time when staff has a chance to maybe prepare some input for us.
Yeah,
would that be okay with everybody?
Staff could prepare what conduits do we use for communicating with the public? That would be very useful.
The chair will work with staff to see if we can't come back with something on that.
That'd be very good.
I think
Thank
it's,
I have a quick question regarding the camp draw, and forgive me if you've already communicated this to the commission, but is this a different style draw, more equitable for anyone as opposed to a race to get in, to get classes? There was some discussion a while back on that. Just wondering what the process is for getting into the summer camps.
So the process is a lottery, and you can submit your forms to any of the community centers by March 16th. So it's not a rush to get in. It's not a race. There's, people aren't lined up outside the door.
That's what it sounded like. And is this different this year from last year? Or
No, this has been the same way for quite some time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Natalie, just one quick question. You said there was posters or whatever. Do we post those in the library? It would seem that that would be a good place to put those.
We do. I didn't do it this time personally, but usually they post in the library, here at City Hall, and all the community centers.
Next
There's
time I'd
also
like
a
you-
couple notice boards outside of Rinconada, for instance, that we post.
Next time, I'd like you to do it personally.
Okay, I'll work on that.
Thank you for that. Ms. O'Kane, anything else?
I am done with the department report.
Okay, so if we're done with the department, I will follow up on the communication list. I think that's a worthwhile question. That would take us to, if I could find the agenda, the minutes of the last meeting. Thank you. Do I have a motion on the minutes of the last meeting? I sense that the hesitation is because the minutes were 56 pages long, and nobody can commit to having read all 56 pages.
I actually read them all today, from 4:30 to 5:15.
Could I have a motion in that case?
I don't know, I'm kind of scared to do that. Yes, I'll move that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? With that, I'd like to move on to the Baylands Comprehensive Plan, and I do have one public speaker. Ms. Kleinhaus, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair McDougall and Commissioners. My name is Shani Kleinhaus. I'm a resident of Palo Alto. I'm the environmental advocate for Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society and on the executive committee for the local chapter of the Sierra Club. I have a few comments on the Baylands Comprehensive Plan. I'm on the stakeholder group. Thank you, Darren, for inviting me. The first thing I would like to recommend is you change the name of the plan to Baylands Preservation Plan rather than management or conservation. The city of Mountain View did that for the boring owls. Instead of boring owl management plan, they call it conservation plan. I think it has a different sound to it. The vision generally is good. Almost. I think it should really recognize human activity and the loss of habitat as threats. And this goes to one of the things that were very obvious in the last meeting of the stakeholder groups, where there's definitely a lot of people that want to use the Baylands for recreation, but it's such a fragile, unique, and threatened ecosystem. We have so little of that left around the bay. And not every place should have that same level of intrusion from people. So the vision of having preservation and conservation really should trickle down throughout the plan to everything that we do. And so far, the draft I've seen had a lot, or the suggested language had a lot of great statements about resiliency and balance. We lost those things. We really need to focus on preservation and how to protect this ecosystem from all the things that people want to do to it, which is a lot, because everybody needs space these days, and why not the Baylands? If we can put more commute trails and we can put some more recreation of this and that. And we need to look at that in the same way that we look at the other preserves, which is where can we allow some activity rather than, oh, let's bring activity and balance. We can't balance anymore. Populations of wildlife, migratory birds, shorebirds are declining so rapidly. And we got it, and we have a treasure in Palo Alto, more than any other city along the bay, South Bay, and we need to take care of it. So I think I would like to suggest that the plan starts with the old master plan for the Baylands. And then instead of trying to make this general, oh, let's balance things, really look at the issues that are threats and the issues of conflicts, whether they're natural, like sea level rise, or human caused, because people bring dogs to places where they shouldn't. It's not like they shouldn't be there at all, but you need to look at where people can do something, rather than let's balance everything and let's see how we can push everything in here. The Baylands is not for everything. It really isn't. It's natural, and people love it this way. And people in Palo Alto seriously care about it. And that was probably, I would say everybody in the last meeting spoke about that. I didn't hear any other voice in the last meeting, and there were quite a lot of people there. So please don't use hazy and great buzzwords. Really focus on nature, endangered species, other species, migratory species, and the plight of these species that have nowhere else to go, and sea level rise is coming, and there's so little left for them. And that is something that we can leave to Palo Alto as we get maybe older and young people come in and they have a chance to see something that is being lost all over the Bay Area and fast. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson.
All right, good evening. I'm here tonight to give you a brief update on the Baylands Comprehensive Conservation Plan. I'm either going to call it the plan or the BCCP, probably the plan. I'm going to cover the planning process, what we've accomplished so far, themes that have come out of the 3 community meetings, and some of the discussion at our most recent community meeting. So the purpose of the plan is to develop goals and policies and prioritized actions to help manage the Baylands Preserve over the next 15 years. And the plan is intended to provide clear direction on how to manage the Baylands ecosystem-based approach. And the intent is to guide protection of the preserve's habitat, wildlife, and resources, to ensure stewardship and access to nature-friendly recreational opportunities, to help the city manage the Baylands in a way that we can thrive in the face of things like sea level rise or climate change, and include some specific planning around Bixby Park and the former ITT property / Renzel wetlands. So we hired AECOM in 2017 to help develop this plan. We put together a work plan. It's got 11 tasks, and the tasks start at the beginning with created existing conditions report. So their biologists came out, toured with staff for several weeks, looked at everything in the park, every way that we currently manage it, where our weeds are, where our recreation is at, where our trails and interpretive signage is at, and used that to create this existing conditions report, which I shared with you in your attachments. The other tasks include developing goals and objectives and priorities and recommendations around challenges like that climate change and sea level rise, and that design plan for Bixby. Early on in the process of doing what we called the interim plan for Bixby, we had come up with a new trail system, benches, signage, and all that. And the intent was the Baylands Comprehensive Plan would come along and finalize those things. We'd take some lessons learned and say, okay, here's the plan going forward, and this will be the final plan for what Bixby will look like. And then we also formed a stakeholder advisory board, which consists of about 20 people that have been pretty good about showing up to our 3 meetings thus far and providing input. So the steps completed so far have been to create this work plan on what we're going to accomplish, that existing conditions report, this stakeholder engagement plan, and the stakeholder advisory group has met 3 times now. So we met on October 18th and December 5th of 2017, and then again in February 15th of 2018. We also hosted a tour of that ITT property I mentioned to walk around the Renzel wetlands and talk about what trails should or should not be there, what should become of the building that's out at the ITT property, what's the appropriate use. And I collected a lot of feedback that'll be ultimately incorporated into some recommendations that come before you for further discussion, probably in another month or 2, I would envision. So at that first stakeholder meeting, we talked about what priorities the group wanted to see, what's important to you and what needs to be in this plan. And they ranged from recreation, or in many cases, what recreation shouldn't be allowed in the Baylands or where it should be allowed. We talked about wildlife, habitat, and resources. We talked about some of those big challenges. Sea level and climate change will come up over and over again. You'll keep hearing that because it's important when we're talking about planning for 15 years and beyond. Community and organization partnerships. Some of these look like our partnerships with Save the Bay, Grassroots Ecology, Environmental Volunteers. What to do again with that LATP site, Bixby Park, and then the former ITT property. And just a reminder, that's 36.5 acres that was recently made parkland. What are we going to do with it? How will it connect to the rest of the preserve, if at all? What to do with that building? And at this meeting, our stakeholders, these were all invited stakeholders, had suggested, this is great, you got a good turnout, but why not just open this up to the general public, which was a great idea. And I'm grateful to the stakeholders for suggesting that, so we did so, posted all over the preserve. And we got a few different folks that hadn't been part of the group before coming to the next 2 public meetings, which was helpful for diversifying our opinions a little bit that get shared. We also created a website that houses the material thus far and acts as another avenue for people to provide input on. At our second community meeting, this one was held on December 18th, the group identified specific opportunities for Bixby and the former ITT property. There were a myriad of different ideas, but they focused on hydrologic connection. This was especially poignant for that ITT property area. This really muted connection to the bay, and a lot of people said this would be an awesome opportunity that we should take advantage of looking about how we might improve that habitat. And connecting a better tidal exchange is a big piece of that. We talked about trails, and wildlife, and parking, how much is appropriate and where. We talked about the Measure E site at Bixby. This is a 10-acre site at Bixby that was taken out of parkland status for looking at an anaerobic digestion system, and that'll come back online for council to consider making it parkland, I think in FY22. And then another big discussion topic was that historic building at the ITT site. And that one seemed to have, there's like-minded thinking on a lot of things, but it seemed to be most folks were not in favor of keeping that building. It seemed to be that they felt the expense of restoration for that was far too great for the benefit. There are challenges. It's such a remote area that if you were to keep it on site, what would you do with parking and restrooms and other amenities that would need to go with a facility like that? So not 100% agreement, but there were a general consensus that that building would perhaps not be appropriate in the site any longer. The third and most recent public meeting, this was held on February 15th, we got into sort of more of the meat of the plan. What are the goals and objectives going to be, and what do they look like? And that, again, focused around the same kind of topics. I won't belabor those. But our consultant is still compiling the notes and feedback, so I didn't include that into your package, so I'll have that. The next time we come back will be the notes and feedback from that one, as well as kind of condensing them all into the beginnings of some chapters on what we're going to, what it's going to look like. There is a couple interesting pieces of this last discussion with the community that I wanted to share with you. One was how we're going to address sea level rise, and now we're getting suggestions from the community on this. One interesting idea is the horizontal levee concept. I'm not sure if you've heard this before, but about a year ago, Ora Loma had done an experiment where they came out and converted what's your traditional steep levees into this alternative levee system, which is kind of a flatter, new system that's supposed to mimic the natural slope that you would have gotten before we altered the wetlands. And if you plant it with sedges and grasses and irrigate it with the treated water, this is, Ora Loma had a water treatment plant, as do we. This is an opportunity for habitat, and you can also slow down waves and resist floods and protect infrastructure. So that's some of the benefits of this. And so our group, some of the members anyways, proposed, couldn't Palo Alto be a site where we do another study for this kind of thing, another experiment? And in fact, Peter Bay, one of the leading ecologists in the Bay, who led the Ora Loma project, has met with Palo Alto staff and discussed some of the options. So it could be something down the line, and it could be an opportunity for this plan and this body to say, yes, we think we should have that be a recommendation in the plan to pursue something like that.
Excuse me, Darren, where is Ora Loma?
You know, maybe I could pull it up. It's in the North Bay, and they have a treatment plant, and so that's the first site they did it. But I could come back with more information next time I come back if you'd like. It's helpful to see a drawing because it's hard to envision what they mean. And I'm sorry I don't have one with me tonight, but next time I'll bring one. Let's see, there was also an interesting discussion. I'm sure the ad hoc committee who participated in the meetings, I'm grateful for their help on this project, will add to this, but there was also an element of this balance recreation with environmental sensitivity. And our group has a lot of environmental stakeholders. It's kind of a little tipped that way because they're passionate about the Baylands, they care, and they want to protect it. And so there is a definite feeling that we should be erring on the side of protecting this resource, that recreation, where it's appropriate, should fit in, but we're not looking at an equal balance there, that really this place is for preserving it, was the opinion of a good deal of our stakeholders. And so I'll let the ad hoc committee chime in on that and share some of the thoughts. The other piece is the vision. We put together a sample vision, and by and large, people supported it with a few recommended tweaks. They wrote in their changes, and that's with the consultant now. I'll get the feedback soon. We'll probably have a revised vision statement for you. I'll leave that up there. I see some folks reading it. The next steps on what we're going to do, we're going to keep working away on getting the notes and summary sent out to our stakeholders, put on our website. We'll incorporate the feedback from everyone's thoughts on our goals, objectives into the corresponding chapter. So this will be in March and April. We'll be putting together those elements of the plan. And just keep working on those parts. You saw in your staff report are fairly robust next steps. But ultimately, we're looking to have the plan completed in December of 2018. So we'll return to the commission several times between now and then for your input and feedback. Just wanted to share this slide. This was how we broke up these tables at this community meeting for those that didn't come. We had these rotating tables with topics, so everyone got to participate in each of these different subcommittees or sub-discussion groups. And again, they ranged from management and organization partnerships and public art, which is a piece of this plan too. And some people have said, well, how would public art figure into a Baylands comprehensive conservation plan? Well, there's already a tremendous amount of public art in the Baylands. In fact, Bixby Park was an art park when it was built. There's a number of features out there that are public art. And so we want to be thoughtful as we go forward when there are other development in and around the Baylands on where that public art goes, making sure it's complementary to the environment, to the rest of the Baylands, and that's why this is included and why I want our stakeholders to have a say on this topic as well. And then, of course, we talked about Bixby, ITT, Rensselaer Wetlands. And that concludes my presentation. I'd like to offer the ad hoc committee to share some thoughts if you did. And again, I thank you for your participation in those meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Mr. Moss, do you have any comments? Commissioner Moss?
I thought the workshops were really well run, and we got many ideas, and I think it was terrific. And I'm noticing on the plan itself that there is really no plan. It's just so far existing land uses, existing management. So coming out of the workshops, there are goals and objectives and plans. So I'm assuming that this is a work in progress, and the next 5 chapters will be about plans, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
So I'll add a comment as part of the ad hoc. The thing that I thought was really interesting and a very specific outcome goes back to page 6 of your presentation, where it talks about the general goals, and it talks about a balance between recreation and habitat preservation. And I think the general discussion ended up saying, maybe we want to have balance of recreation versus preservation throughout the whole city, including the Baylands, including the foothills, and including all the parks. But in the Baylands and the foothills specifically, we'd like to see an imbalance, and the imbalance would be in the direction of the habitat. And I use the word habitat deliberately because I think nature is hardly relevant when we've got the ground sinking 4 feet and so on out there. But notwithstanding that, it is a habitat without question. And I think that was a key outcome of that 3rd meeting and accumulation of the first 2 meetings. And in fact, one of the suggestions was we shouldn't even talk about recreation, we should use the word access, because what we want is people to know they have access. We want them to access it, but we don't necessarily want it to be interpreted as, full-blown recreation. I think that was an outcome. And again, like Commissioner Moss, I applaud the staff work, the consultant work, and the participants. We have so many of these stakeholder meetings where 2 people show up, and we had 30, 40 people in the room, and that was very impressive and well done. Do any other commissioners have questions? Mr. McCauley?
Darren, when the Baylands Comprehensive Plan comes together, is it going to include the Baylands Athletic Center? Or is that totally separate?
It is separate, yeah.
Okay.
We consider it a park versus the open space elements, so it won't be looking at the ball fields necessarily.
Okay. So then, on the topic of balance, let me try and provide a little bit. I appreciated your comment, Darren, which is that you think that the stakeholder group may be, of a particular persuasion. And I understand that there are very sometimes vocal and certainly passionate folks who feel strongly about the Baylands and its current uses and its future uses. I am a little bit concerned, though, about the feedback to date being primarily from folks who are going to quibble over preservation versus conservation, which is frankly not a distinction I totally understand. I guess if there were to be some quibble over that, I would be on the side of conservation, because these are dynamic spaces that will change over time. And I don't know that we want to lock something in to exactly what it is now, or to in any way decrease or try to tamp down public access to our resources. So I certainly don't want to advocate for recreation that's not appropriate for the space, but yeah, I think it's great that we have people that run in the Baylands, and making sure that we have the right trail system to accommodate those people, I think is important. So I'm not sure what we can do to try and capture additional feedback from people who presently recreate in that space. But if there are things that we can do, it would be great to try and draw them into the stakeholder group.
Thank you.
Yeah, kind of following on that comment from, I was wondering about the stakeholders too, and wondering if, and I want to maybe say it this way, but how young are the youngest participants in the meeting, Darren? And would it be beneficial to reach out to the youth council or some of the youth groups, or even a couple of elementary school children who are interested in conservation or sustainability, to kind of get an opinion about what kids and youth want for the future of the Baylands?
That's a good suggestion. I don't think we have much youth represented on the stakeholder committee. It's a more senior group, and I've been thinking and ruminating on this too, and I know, having worked at the Baylands for a decade or so, that there are different groups, and some of them are less engaged, and how could we reach them? Getting them to repeatedly come to meetings in the evening is unlikely for some of those groups, but there are other ways. There are run groups that we issue permits to, that we communicate with. There are users of the sailing station that are continually coming out year after year to do windsurfing, and there are a lot of youth that come out through our partnerships with Save the Bay to do restoration programs. And I think through 3 of those conduits, I can reach out to some different voices that might be very valuable into this input. And I haven't done it yet, but just in thinking on it now and talking with you, I think that makes a lot of sense, and will provide some input onto these other things we should be looking at, whether it's access and importance of trails, where they want to be, and hopefully find a really good compromise where we're still protecting all the wildlife and all the habitat that we need to, while still addressing some of those concerns and important parts of their needs.
Good, thank you very much.
Commissioner Moss?
This thing about recreation, it takes many forms, and when I was biking through there today and seeing 2 professional dog walkers with eight dogs, what Shani said about that wildlife should take precedence, it doesn't, when we talk about recreation, it doesn't mean a free-for-all. And so there's going to be some pushback, and in making sure we get all the stakeholder groups, one of them may be professional dog walkers. And I don't know if these dogs are Palo Alto dogs or Mountain View dogs, but the bottom line is, I don't think it's appropriate. And so you will get pushback, but we'll have to work that into the plan, even if it means some prohibitions.
David, just to clarify, were these dogs on leash?
What?
Were these dogs on leashes?
Yes, they were.
So it's just the number of dogs that was troubling to you?
Number for him.
Yes, they were on leash, and there were very few other people in the park. So when people come to the park and there's very few people at 11 a.m. on a weekday, they think, that means that it's underutilized. And when we talk about recreation versus preservation and conservation, underutilized has no meaning when you're talking about wildlife. They're there, that's where they live, and as long as, and I don't mind if it's quiet most of the time. So just because it's not used by humans every hour of the day doesn't necessarily mean that it's underutilized.
I had one more question, if I could.
I think we have some more here, and I'll come back.
Okay.
Commissioner Lemire.
Quickly, Darren, just first of all, thank you for your work on this. I just had a quick question on looking through the plan, and one of the notes on non-recreational uses was that there's a lot of traffic, or there is traffic from people test driving cars. And I'm wondering, is it a problem, or is it just a few cars they notice, or is it an actual path that's given to somebody when they go into the Honda dealership or the dealerships near there, say, hey, drive down, just take a right because there's less traffic down there? And is that having an impact?
Yeah, great question. Long-standing issues. For as long as I've been with the city, we've had to, probably on an annual basis, the rangers go over, they talk to the sales crew and say, do not bring them down this road. We don't want any extra traffic, and we sure don't want you speeding, which is often part of the test drive experience. So it's just an annual ongoing thing. I wouldn't say it's a huge problem. We have where they drive is where everyone drives, the duck pond and the nature center. So that's where most of our traffic is coming anyways, but we don't want extra unnecessary non-park visitors coming, and we do talk to them.
Oh, well, I appreciate that the rangers actually reach out to the car dealerships. I think that's great. Thank you.
You bet.
Commissioner Reckdahl.
Yeah, I had a question about those horizontal levees. Would we restrict what grows on there? If you had a natural shoreline with a collection of plants, would all those plants be acceptable for a levee, or do we have to worry about roots degrading the levee?
I can tell, and I don't have in-depth experience with these yet. I mean, there's only one that I know of in our area. I did read that Save the Bay was involved in that project and planted 70,000 plants onto that area. So they're intentionally putting what they want to grow there. Knowing how that ecosystem works, you're going to get volunteers growing. And by and large, I think if you're getting tidal influence, it takes care of most of your weeds with a few exceptions. So most of what would come in addition to what you've planted would probably be okay, and you wouldn't actually have to remove anything.
Okay, thank you. The second question was the LATP site. Is that considered parkland? Is that considered open space?
No, it's city-owned, but it is not parkland at this time.
Okay, so if we came to the conclusion that we wanted that part of the open space, that would take council to incorporate that.
And there is some council direction on the LATPC already in terms of how it's zoned. And I'm sorry, I don't have all that information handy now, but next time I come, I will. But yes, part of the recommendation from this plan could guide what we want to see with the natural elements, because there's some jurisdictional wetlands within the LATP site. Okay. Right now, it's fenced off and separated from the rest of the baylands, but part of the recommendation could be we want to include that, or when that should be included and how, and should it be restored, that kind of thing.
And so the next question would be is, if we wanted the soccer fields there, for example, would that be feasible? Is that not allowed?
It would not be feasible on the jurisdictional wetlands without going through a tremendous amount of permitting and mitigation work, because it's jurisdictional wetlands. There's an upland area that's developed, currently green waste, our city's compost provider, and is using part of that. I also know Public Works rents it out, certain portions of this. It's just flattened base rock area where they have either storage for projects that are concerning for the city. For example, there's a lot of projects where they just have no place to put their equipment, so they'll rent a piece of that property, the developed section, put their equipment there for the duration of the project, and then leave.
Okay, and if
Yeah.
you wanted to put buildings there, for example, city facility.
Yeah, I'd have to check on, see the zoning. I know that governs it, and again, I don't have all the information with me right now.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Gribbs? Finally.
Are you okay?
Vice Chair Greenfield.
Thank you. I'm wondering, is there any discernible call within the community for increased recreation or access in the Baylands?
There have been comments in the past, especially while I was working on the dog park, saying, why on earth wouldn't you put a dog park on the 120 acres of Bixby? That's a perfect place. You should do that. There have been calls for events like bike races, for example, up and down Bixby. And staff long ago, in the direction of the then director, had made certain calls. That's not going to be acceptable. We are going to be focused mainly on nature-friendly recreational activities. And so we'd rule out those, not give permits to events like motocross, where they wanted to carry your bike across things. But other ones like fun runs, even with significant numbers of people, were permitted, and they'd run through the preserve. Lots of requests for running permits to come in with 100 or so people in the early mornings and do running. Other requests for things like, I'm trying to pull from my memory all the different requests we've had over the years. Geocaching, are you familiar with that? So folks want to come out and do geocaching. We put lots of restrictions on what can be done. We like to manage that so they get a permit at no cost, and the staff says, here's where you may or may not go. Here's where you may or may not put these. No off trail, no sensitive habitat, that kind of thing. But those are kind of some of the key ones. Is usually things along the running. I'd say that's the most popular, and then little things like the geocaching.
So my question, or what I'm leading to is, are there arguably appropriate requests for increased recreation coming in? And it sounds like there's limited requests, and I'm really wondering, is there a question within the community in terms of how do we need to increase recreation within the Baylands as opposed to focusing on conservation and preservation, which I think we agree is the priority for a natural environment?
Yeah. I'd say there is some demand for certain things like the running. I'd say that's a very clear, long-time, consistent request. We want to have events for running. And the city itself hosts them, like the Moonlight Run, for example, where several hundreds and hundreds of people come out for that event. And to the other ones, I'd say to a lesser degree. We don't get those requests as much.
And the running sounds like a very appropriate area of focus for the conservation plan to consider what would be appropriate. And then on a more philosophical level, I'm just curious what the major challenge, or what the biggest challenges are for the conservation plan moving forward. Is it the process? Is it a lack of resources, whether it's financial or otherwise? Is it consensus building? I'm just curious what you would consider the biggest challenges of the process.
I think there are a number. I think our recommendation, and when I say our, I mean all the stakeholders and this body, decision on the ITT property, what to do with that building. I already know there are differing opinions amongst other city groups. Our planning commission's looking at it already, and they have certain recommendations that are different. They have historical preservation in mind, and I think we might be at odds on some of those things. I think the eventual funding of some of the recommendations for the ITT property will be difficult to manage. When we talk about increasing water flow from the bay into that ITT property, that's no small feat. It's, in many ways, you'd have to rework that land to get it to drain and flow properly, like an ideal wetland would. So some of those things are going to be challenging. I think this is all achievable, but I think to some degree getting agreement on, this is something when we first proposed this a decade or more ago, I needed a plan to help me deal with people coming to me and saying, here's the weed of the week, here's your stinkwort, abandon all your efforts on all these other things and address this. Well, there's a lot of nuances that go into determining where we're focusing our volunteers, our staff time, and other investments, and to drop them for the weed of the week is a bad management technique. What I wanted was a scientifically driven plan with stakeholder involvement that had a rationale for management decisions. I could say, here's the reasons why we're focused here. It's all backed. We update this periodically. We consult with the very best in the industry, with Fish and Wildlife Service, with Save the Bay, and other experts. But I think that's another one where, with enough time and effort, and we don't see eye to eye, not even with my stakeholders and me on this particular one, a lot of them just say, if it's green, let it be. And that's not my perspective. It's different. And coming to agreement on that will be a challenge, I think. But that's exactly what this plan needs to do. And the process of debating it and discussing it is valuable, where we all learn from one another.
Well, thank you. I applaud all of your efforts on this process. The summary of the current status was excellent, and I would say I generally support the emphasis on conservation and preservation while maintaining access, and that seems to be the general prevailing opinion, but keep up the good work, and thank you.
Do you have any other comments? If there are no, are other comments, I would only like to reiterate thanking Mr. Anderson for an incredible amount of work on this, and I think your whole team is doing a great job, and I think the whole approach is worthy of the city and the Baylands itself. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
The next item is a review of the retreat and a discussion of that. Ms. O'Kane. And you might notice that I am making an effort to be a little more formal than we might have been. Part of that is driven by, we don't particularly have an audience at the moment, but times we do have an audience, I think we're better to be on the high ground than not. And if you guys want to, if any of the commissioners wants to send me a note or tell me stop or take a different approach, I'm totally willing to listen to it. But I would like to try and add some deference to our approach.
Okay, Kristen O'Kane, Community Services. So I'm going to rely on you, Chair, and the other commissioners who are at the retreat to correct anything that I may have not captured properly, but I wanted to provide an update on the outcomes from our retreat, which was last Friday. I thought it was very productive, and I think we accomplished a lot. It was great having Councilmember Scharf there to weigh in on some of our priorities, and also just some of our discussion points on his opinions on what he thought council might support and not support. So that was very helpful. So the first slide I have here is just a recap of the priorities that were discussed and agreed upon. The first was recreation, and while this is quite broad, there were some specifics that were mentioned, including aquatics, lighting, turf fields, seniors, youth, dogs, and inclusion. The next was field, court, and facility usage policy. The third was Foothills Park, specifically 7.7 acres in Buckeye Creek. The fourth is parks usage, parks development and access. The fifth was the Baylands, and I grouped those together to focus specifically on the 10.5 acres, the Baylands Conservation Plan, and the golf course. And then also the sixth one was maintenance, and this one was discussed specifically to focus on the fact that we should be able to maintain what we have and ensure that we are maintaining what we have efficiently and also sustainably. So did you want to add anything, Chair, to these priorities, or did you want to have a discussion before I move on?
Is everybody happy with these as we discussed? Any changes? This is the abbreviated form that we had, and I'd like to take this chance to thank Natalie for paying attention to us all day and feeding us and helping us with the whole thing. Thank you for that. Are there any comments on our priorities?
Don,
Commissioner Moss.
did fundraising,
Your job is to smack me.
did fundraising or funding come up, especially with Council Member Scharf?
I would say Councilmember Scharf was very generous with his support and direction and insight into the funding issue. He clarified that any funding approach would be specific to Parks and Recreation. It wouldn't be part of a larger effort that would include fundraising for other activities. It would be specific. He clarified that Cubberley would not be part of that conversation because it added too much complication to it, and I forget the other one that we left out. But in fact, I believe Ms. O'Kane will get into the third slide here where we're going to talk specifically about the other approach that we took, which was to list the topics.
That's correct, and we did talk about fundraising. I know Commissioner Cribbs was hoping, I think we'd have a little bit more time to talk about some fundraising efforts that we could support. Our discussion really focused mostly on a potential ballot measure in the future and the current efforts of the city to do some initial polling on that effort, but other fundraising, we didn't get into a great amount of detail, I don't think. So no comment.
Yeah, I think the real interest was to identify what the net requirement might be after we figured out what some of the incremental funding opportunities and sources might be as well. And I think that'll circle back around.
So then we also had a separate list that were just called other, but they're sort of other areas of focus that the commission, I believe, will just pay a little bit more attention to this coming year and have some involvement and focus. The first was inclusion, and the discussion was really about cultural inclusion and making things accessible and inclusive for different cultures in Palo Alto. The second was the Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, which is often referred to as the Fry's site, but we should try and call it the Ventura Area Plan or Coordinated Area Plan. The next was Cubberley. As you know, we're about to kick off the Cubberley master planning effort. And so that's something that the commission will definitely want to pay attention to. And we grouped together a gymnasium in this category as well, only because the discussion was sort of focused around if there were a new gymnasium in Palo Alto, Cubberley would likely be the most logical place for that. The next was the Stanford General Use Permit as it relates to parkland and recreation needs in Palo Alto. Pocket parks and pop-up parks was also discussed, and I've actually included a photo of a pop-up park that was on University Avenue a couple of years ago now, I think. So any discussion on these other areas of focus?
Are there any questions?
I do have my pet project, my pet
Commissioner
issue,
McCauley?
which is considerations around access to Foothills Park.
Could you repeat that, please?
Oh, consideration of access at Foothills Park.
We did discuss that. We should make sure we cover that somewhere in this list, right?
I can add it.
Yeah,
to the
I think we should. I think that's a worthy discussion.
So as I mentioned, we also talked about potential ballot measure and the initial stage that the city will be going through, which is polling the community to see what might be viable for a ballot measure. And we started the conversation by talking about what staff had identified as priorities with respect to the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. There were some other projects that were discussed, which was a second phase of the Junior Museum and Zoo, as well as an animal shelter. I didn't include those on this list because they're not directly in the Parks Master Plan, but we did discuss those. And then we built off the staff recommended list, or the commission built onto the staff recommended list, and this is what was the final list, which I have since provided to our city manager's office, as well as the Public Works Department, who are sort of leading this effort to do the polling. So they now have this list.
I didn't think that we were going to poll on Foothill Park. I thought that that was going to go in the other areas of focus to be discussed, but it wasn't going to be put into polling, but maybe I just didn't understand it.
I questioned that as well. I have the photo of the whiteboard and it was on there, but it may have been one we decided to take off and just didn't get removed.
The guy running the whiteboard may have been inept.
I think the consideration of Foothills Park was more general rather than specific to the Buckeye Creek restoration plan.
Yeah, I think it was trail improvements, and we were just talking general improvements. Would the public be interested in us putting money into Foothills Park, whether that be trails, whether it be facilities, whatever? So I think it was a general question about would they support money? Would they support revenue going to Foothills Park?
Sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I was going to change the subject.
So was I. Go ahead, change the subject.
Just real quickly on the fourth bullet, I think it might be helpful to rename that additional parkland acquisition fund. It'll be more obvious what it is then.
Thank you.
The other observation I would make is that it might be worth, for purposes of communicating with other internal organizations, if we had polling priorities and then Parks Master Plan and listed all of the ones that you have here, and then something that said X or outside the master plan, and added the Junior Museum and the dog thing back in, because I'm a little concerned there are other parties that are interested in those things that we're going to end up in that conversation anyway, so we might as well talk about it now, or just be aware of it ourselves. Does that make sense? Or
It does make sense. I mean, these were just prepared for the purpose of this meeting today.
Great, okay.
So
That's fair,
those
thank you.
other projects are already being
that's
provided by others.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then moving on to our ad hoc assignments, I have them here. I think I accurately represented what we discussed, but I think now would be the time to make any changes if anyone has had second thoughts, or if something wasn't properly recorded.
I think on the park and facilities policy, perhaps you could change that to park and facility use policy.
Okay.
Just all singulars and ad use.
What? Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
And you can add me to the park dedication policy.
Okay.
Thank you, I expected that would happen.
In fact, in my version of the sheet, you are. Are there any other comments or questions?
I have one very minor comment. It's kind of dovetailing off of Jeff's comment about the name of the other committee. Ann, do you think that park facilities would be more descriptive than park amenities? Perhaps it doesn't matter one way or the other.
Yeah, I think it could be.
I don't know, do others have a preference? Facilities?
I would suggest keeping amenities as it is, so it doesn't confuse with facility in the park and facility use policy, potentially.
Right. I guess in part what was kind of driving my thought here is that one of the items we put onto the charge of this committee was to consider maintenance issues, which I think is, primarily a facilities issue rather than a amenities. But again, I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but I thought it might be more descriptive. That's all.
Could we consider calling it park amenities and maintenance? And embrace them both there and not confuse. I understand what you mean by facilities, but I also think the other facility use runs some risk of confusing. Would that help, or? I don't care.
What about development and maintenance of park facilities or park amenities?
Park amenities and investment.
Or just park amenities. That's fine too. I don't mean to. Exactly.
We're killing you with bad options.
So I would note that we did make that a slightly bigger, I think more interesting challenge, and would ask Commissioner Moss if he would be interested in joining that one as well. Which one? What do we call it now? The park amenities one, the final one there. That's the whole issue of dog parks. It's the issue of bathrooms and it's the issue of the ongoing maintenance. If you're not interested, that's fine too.
I'm not interested.
Okay, that. And I would offer that if that ad hoc wants to meet and come back and say they renamed themselves, that would probably be okay.
I think what's important is to think about what the original intent of that ad hoc was, which I think was, to putting in new dog parks, putting in new restrooms, one word, designing, a new park features. That's when this ad hoc would be involved. I think we could add maintenance to it, but I feel like that's almost a bigger, maybe that's another ad hoc, I'm not sure. So I just wanted to leave.
Well, Ann and I will certainly tell you if we think it should be another ad hoc and too much for us to work through with Darren from time to time.
And would it be appropriate to suggest that that the ad hocs meet at whatever their first opportunity is to meet with staff and then come back with a very short goal definition agreed between staff and the ad hoc so that we have some understanding of what we're trying to achieve?
Are you suggesting having meetings now, not now, but up front, so that as opposed to, for example, the 10.5 acres, meeting for the first time when that project
Yeah, I'm just suggesting whenever the first meeting is.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting, let's call separate meetings to discuss goals. I'm just saying whenever it turns out that the first meeting is, I think it would be appropriate if we came back with some agreement as to what we're going to try and do in those ad hocs for the year.
I think that would be really helpful, and just set clear expectations up front and what the goal is, and yeah.
Because I want to make sure that Commissioner McCauley's all over the maintenance stuff. Do we want to talk briefly about the liaison?
Yes, so I have one more slide, and these are the liaison assignments. There's a couple that, I guess there's just one, which is the maintenance piece. That does not have a liaison, which could be fine right now, and perhaps when Darren feels the need to have a liaison.
I was the liaison to the Friends of Parks. Does that change?
I suggested that change in that I thought that they were sufficiently important that we might also almost want to set a precedent of the chairman being so every year the new chairman would be the representative to the Friends. I think they're important enough to show them that deference. I would like to take the same approach we took last year, as let's both go to the meetings or whatever. So I'm not trying to exclude you. I just think that if we told them that the chairman is representing, I think that would be more powerful.
All right, so that the only liaison assignment that's not assigned is maintenance to amenities. What's that?
So I think that actually in our conversation on Friday that we determined it was probably best for the ad hoc committee to take that in the first instance. So I think that, something that Ann and I will be doing at one of our future meetings with Darren is to sit down and, kind of look at Darren's comprehensive list or planning on the maintenance front and try and provide a little bit of feedback. So I think that that one's covered.
And I would add about the maintenance that it really is an opportunity for the staff to say, we don't have enough money to fund this particular project or to take care of it the way it needs to be taken care of. Darren had a really good example about the $15,000 a year that you had and you needed more, and so something didn't get maintained, and then everybody was like, well, why isn't it maintained? And so for us to play a part in helping to get more money when it was appropriate for the staff. So it actually turned out to be a really cool thing that came out of the retreat, that was something that we could really help with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so does that mean you need a liaison for that? or not?
I think, as Commissioner McCauley said, that was moved. It was on my sheet actually moved into the park amenities, which is why we were saying park amenities and maintenance there. And I think this is to put some focus on it, as this was one of the things that Councilman Scharf helped us with, saying, if you guys had told us that we needed money, then maybe we would have been able to get some money. And so this is a way for the commission to see if we can stand behind or in front of Mr. Anderson to get money for what's necessary.
So then do you still need someone for park amenities? Because I was on the funding, but I guess I'm not on the funding anymore. So,
David, do you have any interest in the Palo Alto Recreation Foundation liaison? I'd be willing if you want to. I can drop off that. I have two others besides that.
Yeah, I guess I'd rather do funding than park amenities, but if it's already taken, then I'll just do park amenities. But if you want to make a switch.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily switch. I would drop off Palo Alto Recreation Foundation if you wanted to do that.
I see.
The other thing that we might consider is it came to light that there is a Friends of the Foothills, and that we haven't had any kind of relation. We don't know if it exists or have any relationship with or whatever. Maybe Commissioner Moss would like to explore the Friends of the Foothills and come back and say, hey, it's not interesting or useful, or hey, we can reconstitute this. Would that be interesting?
Yeah, I've always thought also the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space, because of connectivity to other parks, very interested. I'm very interested in that. So that would be more appealing for me.
And I would defer to staff relative to, do we want commission connection with the Mid-Peninsula Open Space? Would that be okay?
Yeah, we have a good relationship, mutual aid agreements. We have a staff member that works as a ranger that also works for Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space. So we've got a great connection there already. I don't know that we need one, but if you wanted, I suppose there might be opportunities, including attending their board meetings, just to learn what they have going on.
I think for one of the commissioners to be informed on that would be really positive, so I would support that. So does that mean you want to, so we have that one. What did you think about the Foothills Foundation? Would you like to at least explore that for us?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that would be fine.
The only thing I'd like to do is echo the comment that I really think that was a constructive session that we had on Friday, and thank staff again for their participation and support. So we should be able to move on to other ad hoc committee and liaison updates. These would obviously be older ones if they're changed, but are there any other comments or updates?
I just had a question. We had mentioned looking at a date for Palo Alto Recreation Foundation and Friends of the Parks to come in and speak about what they were going to do, and if there's any update or thought on what date we may want to do that, so I can reach out to the Palo Alto Recreation Foundation.
I think we'll just simply add that to the tentative agenda item, and I think that's going to depend on what other topics, but I think we should do that sooner rather than later.
So the chair and I can work on the agendas for the next couple of months and see where we might have space to fit that in and let you know.
Is that acceptable?
Is there any news on the ad hoc for funding? What Sheriff mentioned, or should I say, Councilperson Sheriff mentioned that we have to get something to them by their June meeting, right? So that's like 3 months away.
I provided the list of your priorities to the city manager's office, and I've let them know that Councilmember Scharf had recommended a joint meeting, so.
So would we hear from them, from the manager's office, about when that meeting was? I think that was a pretty important meeting.
You would hear from me. I'll follow up with the city manager's office this week and find out if that's something.
Yeah, and it's the Council Finance Committee that I think Councilman Scharf was talking about, a mutual meeting where we would be invited to one of their regular Finance Committee meetings. And I think that would be valuable to get some insight into what they're thinking. Is that fair? Any other comments?
Do you need any more of our help at the staff level to do with the funding options, like grant writing and going out to Friends of Palo Alto Parks or others?
Possibly as we move forward, but as of today, we don't have something that we've decided, yes, we should pursue grant funding for this, or we should pursue donations for this project, but it's something that we should be paying attention to and paying more attention to, public-private partnerships, donations, grants, things like that. So as something comes up, we would engage the commission at that time.
I've shared that analysis that I showed you with staff so that we could look at which are the topics that should just be left alone and we should try and raise money for versus which of the topics that may even come off the list and be totally funded, like the golf course, the clubhouse. I think if we meet with the ad hoc to go through that with staff, then we can maybe come back with a better analysis of here's the whole list, here's how we could here's how we could go after our liaisons or whatever it is, in a way. But I think it's important that we remember we're liaisons, not salesmen and closers and whatever. And I think we had a good conversation on that at the meeting. Is that fair?
It is. I mean, I would say that the sales piece, we always welcome you promoting and selling our services and programs to the community. But I would agree that the closing part is probably more of a staff role.
I was trying to differentiate sort of marketing from selling. You know, you're right, we should be marketing like crazy, but not necessarily out doing deals.
Understood.
Ambassadors.
Ambassadors is perfect. Thank you.
I like ambassadors, definitely.
Well, I'm still thinking that it's a little bit fuzzy for me, just because we did hear about the opportunity for a bond issue and and the timing of that. And I think that that's going to be great to get all that confirmed. But then there are other possibilities that we've been kind of tossing around both in the ad hoc and on the commission. One would be what opportunities there are for the city to reach out to or make the opportunity for various wealthy individuals who would like to help fund something important in Palo Alto. And that's not this is not an order of importance. This is the kinds of buckets that you could identify. The other are the grants that are available that take a longer time to write, and we should probably think about, Darren, you said you might have some money for a grant and what we would write that for a grant writer. And then there are the smaller things that could be funded. We talked about the dog park and the future dog park. And so just to kind of get that all on a piece of paper, that what we've been talking about, and then it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be a work in progress. And then certainly look to staff for whatever your thoughts are in the direction. I mean, I understand that we're not going to be out there selling this, but I also think that there have been a lot of good ideas, and it's probably time to put them down on a piece of paper and either decide whether they're going to move forward with them or not, and what other good models we have around, like Stanford, to see how they do their fundraising and endowment. That's all.
So I would suggest the ad hoc do that, and then we work with staff relative to bringing that back.
I was suggesting, yes.
And bringing that back here so that everybody
Yeah.
can see it. Okay? Is there anything else? Anything else?
No, I just say your microphone's off.
Your what?
Your microphone is off. It's on now.
Yours is on too. Mine. So fully. Is there anything else that we need to cover? If not, I would entertain an adjournment.
Could I say one more thing, please?
Yeah.
In the interest of everybody's time, I'm having a lot of trouble trying to figure out when can we have a meeting. I can have one between this and this and this and this, and I know that's just life in the big city, but it would be somehow great if each of the commissioners could, maybe in a perfect world, say, okay, I'm going to set aside this time on my calendar for whatever ad hoc meeting would come up. Like, we know we have a commission meeting every month on Tuesday. Is it possible to set aside a 8:30 in the morning slot or a 5 o'clock in the evening slot for a particular ad hoc, and then have it, if something came up that really needed to address, to add that too? Because I think that there are a total, trying to set up one meeting, of 6 or 7 emails, and that seems to me like a big waste of time and, at least for me, frustration. So I apologize for bringing it up right now, but it would be great if we could think about how that might work with consideration for the staff, because you have a lot of other things to do besides take care of us. So just a thought.
So you're suggesting a standing meeting date for specific ad hocs on the calendar?
Kind of like that, yeah.
And so maybe the staff liaison to each of the ad hocs could come up with could suggest a date as appropriate, if appropriate, for the ad hoc, based on their schedule.
And it may not work. It's like the paper and the reports online. But at least I'd like to try it.
It sounds like something good for each ad hoc to discuss the next time they meet, if they can arrange a time to meet.
We can talk about it next month.
And I would like to discuss the agenda before we adjourn.
Before that.
For next month.
Before that, we have comments and announcements, and I have a comment.
So first, let me go back. I would suggest that each, it has been pointed out that we do need to identify the staff person for each of these ad hocs. Is that not right? So.
That's correct.
And then.
We'll provide that.
And then the ad hoc can work with that staff person. Some of these might work with having a regular meeting, and others are just totally irregular. And I think they can be worked out independently. So comments and announcements, Commissioner Moss?
I wanted to make a comment when the tennis players were talking, because I feel that by not saying anything, it hardens the two sides, and month after month, they come to us with emotional, impassioned pleas, and we really have to come up with a compromise. And I rattled off 6 things that could be used for a compromise, not 2 or not 1, but 6. And I would like that to be a high priority for the next meeting, because I think it's bad PR for us when you get 15 people out here and we don't say a thing. So can we get that on the agenda for next, well, actually, can we get them together outside of this meeting and come up with a compromise? I'll send the 6 ideas, but I think we need to address it, just like we did with the dog parks and just like we did with the Rinconada pool.
So I would say we do have an ad hoc on that. I think Adam's done an extremely good job of having various outreach meetings, and there's an outreach meeting plan that would involve both parties. And so I would suggest that we leave that with the ad hoc. I felt that it was inappropriate to start a conversation on a topic that wasn't agendized. And that's why I didn't think we should engage. I thought it was appropriate to listen, thank them, be aware, but not engage in this particular meeting.
Yeah, I agree. This is not for a full-blown discussion, but I think what you just said should have been said to them, and it wasn't. So I think just so that they know that there is an ad hoc committee and that they are meeting with representatives would allay the concerns of the public, because I'm surprised that they're still coming to us if something is being worked on behind the scenes.
It's not behind the scenes. I don't think it's behind the scenes, because the same people have showed up at all of the ad hoc committee meetings.
Then why are they still here?
I can offer an opinion on that, but I don't. They came to the last meeting. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on this, but I think they know that we're listening, both in the ad hocs and here. Are there any other comments?
I have some topics for the agendas. Okay. Jeff, Commissioner Lemire mentioned the Friends of the Palo Alto Parks and the Palo Alto Recreation Foundation. I would like to see that we had them come in, or at least the Friends of Palo Alto Parks, 4 or 5 years ago, and it was very useful. So I'd like to see that again. And we also are working on that park dedication. Have someone from the legal department tell us what are the ramifications of park dedication and what kind of constraints does it have, and other ramifications.
I want to make sure that people realize that they were asked to, we talked to them about Bayland signs, so I'm not sure it's appropriate to have them talk to us right now.
This is just a generic discussion of here, last time it was focused to be, this is what our organization does, and this is how we work with the city. And just an overview. It was not anything in particular. It was just an overview and get to know each other. I think that would be appropriate.
I think we can at least ask the Friends if they'd like to come and update the commission on how many members they have and what their focus might be and whatever. I think that could be appropriate. Commissioner Moss, I'd like to work with you on that to make sure that we approach them properly, if that's okay. And while I'm speaking to Commissioner Moss, thank you for pointing out that maybe I should have reminded them about the ad hoc committees.
My request for the agenda matched Commissioner Rechtel's. Those were the top two on my list to get a presentation, to learn about the Friends of the Park, and also especially on the park activity guidelines. It's something we've been looking forward to for 6 months or more, and would really love to see that come to fruition.
Commissioner Gribbs?
Yes, I just wanted to add the request that we learn about the rules and regulations of the placing of art in parks, specific to the dog park across from California Avenue, but just in general, so that we understand what agreements are out there and how we respond to that.
Okay, good idea. Anybody else? So other than these specific topics, I guess we would want to make sure that we were continuing to have the things that are, the many things that are being worked on moving forward as the staff thinks is appropriate to bring them for discussion or for action.
Correct. So for the March meeting, we'll have a discussion on the Boulware Park improvements. This will be following the community meeting. And then, Darren, did you have anything specific for March? No.
Would that be time to have a report back or any observations back, and just as part of the department report about the lights in Cubberley, the temporary?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Going on right now?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Be great.
Provide that, yeah.
And I'll just comment on the temporary lights. One evening, Commissioner Moss and I met with Adam and Neil from Palo Alto Soccer Club just to see the lights in the preliminary. They were still working on tweaking in the adjustment, but it looked pretty nice. It seemed to meet expectations as described.
And the bleed, it wasn't bad bleeding over into the neighborhood?
No, it didn't appear bad to me.
And nobody's run into one yet? Any other topics? If this was the library commission, we could say, well, let's just have our next meeting at Cubberley under the lights. In that case, can I now dare to ask for a motion for adjournment?
I so move.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.